Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about developing better teach-out plans, and the reason for this presentation is because our accrediting body, SAC-COC, has recently gotten quite picky about the teach-out plans and what we've been submitting, and I've had to follow up on numerous teach-out plans this past spring semester. And so we want to give you some tips and tricks that we've learned in those interactions with SAC-COC and what we can do to provide better teach-out plans so that we don't have these issues moving forward. So what I thought we would do is start with why. Why do we even have to do the whole teach-out plan process? And it really has to do, first and foremost, it's a SACS requirement. And it is a SACS requirement because we have to ensure that we deliver what we promise to students. So when we admitted students into the university and they began in one of our degree programs or other programs that they receive a credential for, we need to promise to them that we can deliver that. And so as we make decisions to change the format of some of our programs or to even sunset some of our programs, SACS requires that we reach out to these students, share with them a teach-out plan so that they have a reasonable path to completion of that program. So also developing a teach-out plan is going to give you all an opportunity to really think through what kinds of resources you're going to need to get these students through the program that we promised them. So this is an exercise also that helps the program in determining any additional resources that you may need to teach out a program. These teach-out plans also ensure that all parties have received communication and are aware of the pending closure. That includes faculty, staff, and students. So nobody's caught off guard by any type of program closure or program reformat that requires a teach-out plan. And it also ensures that students don't have prohibitive or unexpected burdens placed on them to finish the program of choice. And I like to think of this as the golden rule. We made a promise when students were admitted to the university, and we need to deliver on that promise. And so it's not really fair to the student to get a teach-out plan for their program and then realize that they're going to have an undue expense or an undue burden that they weren't planning on originally when we sold them the bill of goods, so to speak, about the program that they would be involved in. So how do you know if you need a teach-out plan? Well, anytime one of our programs, that is a major, a standalone minor, a certificate, or a proficiency badge, ceases to admit students, you're going to need a teach-out plan. We no longer do suspension of admission. So I want that to be very clear now. The old substantive change policy that we had allowed us to suspend admission to do whatever we needed to do to get that program back on better footing. SACS no longer allows us that flexibility. Anytime we cease to admit students in one of the things listed here, that is a major, a minor, standalone minor, a certificate or proficiency badge, we have to let SACS know we have to have a teach-out plan in place for that. So keep that in mind. This includes any offering of the program or the program location. So this is new. Actually, for a couple of years it's been in place now, but it really is kind of a new way of thinking about things. In the past, if we were closing something, let's say on the Gulf Park campus or on the Hattiesburg campus, but overall we were keeping the program, we didn't do teach-out plans. That's no longer the case. So if you decide, you offer a program in Hattiesburg and online, and you decide to remove the Hattiesburg offering, that in itself is a teach-out. Even though the program will remain at the university, we are ceasing a mode of delivery, and that requires a teach-out plan according to SAC-COC. And again, we did promise students that they could complete that program at the Hattiesburg campus, for example. Things like our regular minors and foundational badges do not require the submission of teach-out plans. That's because a minor actually is a subset of a major, and a major takes care of the minor. Foundational badges do not appear on the transcript, and so those badges do not require a formal teach-out plan. Having said all of that, if you do decide to close a regular minor or one of the foundational badges, I highly encourage you to think about teach-out plans, because we still need to make sure that we deliver everything that we promise to students. So if you are offering currently a foundational badge and you decide to get rid of it next week, think about the students that are currently in that badge and how you could complete their offering that you gave them for that particular foundational badge. While it's not required as part of our teach-out process or any SAC COC requirement, it's still a best practice to think about how we can take care of the students in delivering the things that we promised them that we would give them. Also, keep in mind that some substantial changes to degree plans may also require teach-out for students. So while we wouldn't be submitting that paperwork to SAC COC per se, let's say we have program X and it's significantly changing its program such that certain courses may not be offered in the future, you still have to think about how those courses are going to be impacting students in previous bulletins, older bulletins, right, that have significantly different requirements. So keep that in mind as well. So even though you're keeping a program, if you're changing it significantly, a best practice may be for you to develop a teach-out plan for that as well. Now, quite frequently that involves students simply switching their bulletin year, although you can't require that, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But usually what's happening in these degrees is that you're actually streamlining your degree plan, and it's usually in the student's best interest to think about changing a bulletin year in that case. But just keep that in mind. So if it appears on the official transcript, you always need to keep in mind teach-out may be needed. So let's talk about a little bit of a teach-out checklist here, the things that are absolutely required in any teach-out plan that you develop. And for those of you who know me, you all know that I'm a really big fan of checklists. I think this is the easiest way for us to keep track of what is required. The whole curriculum process is built on a checklist process, so keep that in mind. You really do have a checklist for this. You don't have to develop your own. And all of our teach-outs require 6 things. And those things are, you have to provide an estimated end date of the teach-out plan. As we evaluate your teach-out, we need to see whether or not it's a reasonable time frame for students. You need to provide an explanation of how affected parties will be informed of the closure. And again, this includes students, faculty, and staff that are involved in that particular program. And I really highlight here the how part. Okay, there's how and there's what. You got to do the what as well, but SACS keeps coming back and saying, how were these parties informed, or how was this, that, or the other done as part of your teach-out plan? So they're really focusing a lot on how these days. So keep that in mind as you develop your teach-out plans. Again, another how here. We need a description of how students will be advised of their options. As you develop a teach-out plan, there's quite frequently more than one option in that teach-out plan for students to complete their degree program, as an example. So how were they advised of these options? You also need to provide a description of how students will be helped to complete the program without disruption. A student should not have a semester where they can't complete something towards that degree. So keep that in mind. You can't build in barriers to their progress. So without disruption, students have to be able to complete that program. You need to provide a discussion of any additional expenses that might result. And again, how students will be notified of those additional expenses. We'll talk a little bit more about this later, but you can't use the teach-out plan as a way to increase your revenue stream. You can't just increase expenses because things are on teach-out. So we want to keep things, additional expenses to the bare minimum as possible. And then 6, and this is certainly not the least, right? It just happens to be the last one we're talking about here. But you need to provide an explanation of how faculty and staff will be redeployed. All faculty and staff in any teach-out will be redeployed in some form or fashion. There may be reductions in force, and if that occurs, then you also need to include a discussion of what kind of assistance the university will be providing or your unit will be providing in helping those staff or faculty find new employment. Okay, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. So let's talk about some tips to help you build out the best teach-out plan that you can build. Again, these are just tips. We recommend that you look at all of these before you begin building out your specific teach-out plan for any of your programs. But the first thing, right, was that estimated end date of the teach-out plan. Well, how do we determine that? It is best practice, in my opinion, to identify the status of all students currently enrolled in the program. That's going to greatly impact your end date for your teach-out. If all of your students happen to be at the junior level, let's just say you have a program that hadn't attracted any new student enrollments in a couple of years, and all of your students are at the junior level, that's going to be a very different estimated end date than for a program that just finished admitting a entire new cohort of freshman students. Okay, so it's going to be very important that you look at the student body that's currently enrolled in your program as you determine the estimated date of your teach-out. You also need to allow for a reasonable amount of flexibility. It's very important to remember that very few of our students actually complete their degree in 4 years. So if you have freshmen that are coming in this year and you're building out a teach-out plan, it wouldn't be entirely fair to say, well, we've got a 4-year teach-out plan. Most students are going to take longer than 4 years to complete their degree program. Okay, so also, right, the federal government, in terms of financial aid, allows students up to 150% of a degree to continue to receive financial resources. So if we apply that to the teach-out plan, that means that a 4-year degree really needs to have about a 6-year teach-out plan for any program that is currently admitted freshmen. So somewhere around 6 years would be a reasonable amount of flexibility for a teach-out plan. Now, it could be a little bit less than that, but it certainly wouldn't be appropriate to come back and say, well, we've got freshmen in the pipeline, we're going to teach this out in 3 years. That certainly wouldn't be an appropriate length of time for a teach-out plan. You also need to remember that students who have been admitted into the program have to be accommodated as well. So it's very important to think about when we're going to close that portal. And there's going to be some information in our new curriculog forms indicating that you cannot stop admitting students in the middle of a recruitment cycle. A recruitment cycle has to have ended before you can completely shut down the recruitment portal. So we'll have more details on that in the curriculog forms themselves. But you've got to keep that in mind. If we're admitting students right now, those admitted students are part of your teach-out plan and have to be accommodated. Point 2 on an explanation of how affected parties will be informed of the closure. Again, this includes students, faculty, and staff. You really need to be explicit here. Don't be vague when you're talking about this explanation. The best practice for students is to not only email them, but also do this during advisement. It's also best practice, in my opinion, to reach out to advisors, make sure that they are in the loop of the teach-out plan so that as those students are coming in for advisement, they can then be informed of all of their options. You need to inform faculty and staff during the shared governance process. Faculty control the curriculum, and we have a shared governance process for that starts at the school level, where your curriculum committees develop curricula. They also develop the teach-out plans. Regardless of why we are maybe closing a program, faculty are responsible for the curriculum and need to develop those teach-out plans. That's one of the main reasons why this has to run through the councils before it gets to the provost. Regardless of why the program may be closed, faculty, through the shared governance process, need to be developing those teach-out plans to ensure that the quality of the program remains during the teach-out process. Very important that all of your curriculum committees keep minutes and notes of decisions that were made, who was at the table, etc. And emails, keep those emails that were sent to any impacted faculty and staff. Make sure that they're informed of the coming closure. A best practice with the curriculum proposal process is to attach drafts of those email communications that you're going to share with students, faculty, and staff. That way we have them in file if SAC-COC should come back and say, we want to see copies of those communications. And they have come back and asked for copies of those communications in the past. So it's very important that you keep those types of records, and the easiest way to do that is to keep them in Curriculog so that they're easily accessible by myself should our substantive change partners at SAC-COC reach out for that kind of information. Point 3, a description of how students will be advised of their options. Well, the first thing that you need to do for this, right, a good tip here is to think about what options students will actually have to complete their degree. So it might be a situation where we're offering a program in Hattiesburg and online and on the Gulf Park campus. And so maybe we're removing the Hattiesburg offering. So what options do they have? Well, they could obviously complete their degree on the Hattiesburg campus, because that's going to be part of our teach-out plan. But they may also think it would be more convenient for them to maybe go to the Gulf Park campus or to switch to the online campus. So again, you need to think about what options students will have to complete their degree at the time that we're thinking about a teach-out plan. And again, a best practice is to write down all possible completion options and provide those to students during an advisement session. So as you're advising students and you notify them, in the one-on-one, that you're able to tell them all of their completion options that they may have at their disposal. I do believe that this type of communication is handled better in person. I think emails outlining multiple options to students might confuse them, and it certainly is impersonal. I could just imagine if I was in a program and I received an email that said something like, your program's being taught out, here's your options. I could be confused, I think, pretty easily, and I think most people could be, and it would seem impersonal. It would seem like, oh, you're just getting rid of something that I just signed up for. So do a lot of this in those one-on-one communications that you have during advisement. Of course, you want to follow up with emails so that you have a paper trail, of course, but I do think these are types of things that need to be handled primarily in person. You do need to communicate in those communications that we are committed to their completion of that program. Okay, they need to have the sense that we have their back on this, that we are putting together a teach-out plan so that they have a reasonable path to getting exactly what we promised them that we would deliver. So in all of your communications, make sure that that commitment is highlighted, that we are committed as an institution to seeing them through to walking across the stage, or whatever the case may be. It's very important to remember, as part of your teach-out plan, you cannot force students to switch their major, you cannot force students to switch their bulletin, and you cannot force students to switch their options or locations. So if a student came here in the example we were just talking about to do that program in Hattiesburg, we have to deliver that promise. Okay? Even if it's one student, we have to deliver that promise. So we can't force them to switch majors, we can't force them to switch bulletins, and we can't force them to switch options. That does not mean, however, that we can't encourage them to do something that is in their best interest. It may well be the case that if that student was to switch bulletin years, for example, that they would have a more direct path to completing essentially the same degree. You can certainly share that kind of information with students, but just remember, you can't force them into it. We promised them something when we admitted them, and we need to deliver on it. Point 4, providing that description of how students will be helped to complete the program without disruption. This is a very important one. You need to think about your course rotations. Okay, this really aligns well with the course rotation project that we're still working on it, but we're pretty close to being done, right? On these course rotations. Going to be very important as you think about your teach-out plan. You have to remember that required courses are required. So if your program has 10 required courses, you have to think about course rotations in a way that gives everybody in the pipeline a reasonable opportunity to complete those required courses within your teach-out plan. So if you've got freshmen in your teach-out plan and you have required courses, offering those required courses only one time during the teach-out plan is not going to be sufficient. Okay, so you got to think about the status of the students, what courses are required, how you offer those in the rotation. All of that's going to be important. Electives, however, do have some flexibility. So if you have a program, for example, that required 2 electives to be completed as part of the program, and you have 20 that are on the books, you don't have to offer all 20. You've got some flexibility there. What you have to offer as part of the teach-out is that a student has a reasonable opportunity to complete the 2 required electives throughout that teach-out plan period. Again, keeping in mind the student situations, where they're at in their degree plan or in their time here at the university. So you do have some flexibility with electives, but required courses are required. You also need to think about, would allowing course substitutions be appropriate as part of the teach-out plan? Now, you all know that I really dislike course substitutions, but there are times that it's appropriate. So for example, if you changed your degree plan significantly moving forward that required a teach-out plan for students in older bulletins, maybe it would be in their interest to put in a substitution request for a new course that you've developed to satisfy a requirement in an older bulletin that you intend not to teach anymore. Certainly reasonable to do those types of things. So think about, would allowing course substitutions be appropriate for your teach-out plan? And I would highly recommend you reach out to your associate dean in your college regarding any type of course substitutions before you put that through in Curriculog. And also, it's very important to think about who's going to oversee your teach-out plan. Now, what we do here, of course, you all know that we have program coordinators, but we stopped keeping track of program coordinators once a plan has been put on a hiatus, if you will. It's been removed from our inventory. We removed that. However, we do use the teach-out plan in lieu of that program coordinator. So since you've developed a teach-out plan, that in effect becomes the program coordinator, if you will. So who's going to oversee that teach-out plan? Very, very important. And the new Curriculog form that we'll have starting this fall will actually have a place for you to indicate who's going to be in charge and oversee that teach-out. And by default, they become the program coordinator for that program in teach-out, although we don't keep track of it as a program coordinator responsibility in faculty success or digital measures. So just kind of keep that in mind. Point 5, a discussion of any additional expenses that might result and how students will be notified. Okay, I say use the golden rule here and think about how you would feel if you were promised something for a particular price and then somebody came along and said, oh, by the way, now it's going to cost you more. Nobody would like that, and students certainly aren't going to like this, right? So it's not to say that additional expenses might not be appropriate, but keep this in mind. Use the golden rule here. Do unto others as you would like to be others to do unto you. So just keep that in mind as you think about point 5. Very important here. Again, additional expenses should be near zero for at least one completion option. So if you have 3 or 4 completion options that a student might be able to use to complete their degree as part of the teach-out, one of those needs to essentially not have any new expenses for those students moving forward. Now, they could choose an option that might have additional expenses. Maybe they decided, you know what, they're closing that Hattiesburg offering. It was really inconvenient for me anyway. I'm going to just switch over and do the online offering that they already had. Yes, that's going to incur additional expenses to those students. That was their choice, and that's perfectly fine. We're not forcing them into that option. So very important that you think about this. I see a lot of the time in a teach out plan, people are talking to me about, well, can I move this online because we already teach it online? Can we just do this online? You can't move everything online for these students that are in teach out for a couple of reasons. Number one, it forces them additional expenses. You all know that we charge a fee per credit hour for online delivery of our courses. I believe it's $20, so I'm not exactly sure what the price is. But you take that $20 per credit hour times 15, 20, 15 or so credit hours a semester, it really starts to add up for a student and becomes much more expensive than they had originally planned on. But also it forces students to switch to the preferred delivery format. If a student came here wanting to have that on-campus experience, moving everything online really kind of negates the reason why they came here. They came here to interact with people in a face-to-face environment, and now we've moved everything online, which by and large at this institution is asynchronous. And so they're not getting what we promised. So keep that in mind as well. Just moving everything online, not going to be a valid approach, isn't going to be allowed to be your entire teach out plan. Point 6, the last one here, how we provide an explanation of how faculty and staff will be redeployed, include what assistance will be provided in finding new employment if pertinent. So very important to think about the fact that faculty and staff usually serve more than one program. When I was teaching in chemistry and biochemistry, I served teaching my organic chemistry courses. I served not only chemistry but also the biochemistry program. So I think this is true for the vast majority of faculty at the institution. And so most likely you're going to redeploy those faculty and staff from the program that's under teach out to some other program. Just be explicit. Mention how those efforts will be to be redeployed to other programs. Do not say not applicable. I've gotten a lot of pushback from SAC-COC this semester where I knew what the program meant. They meant it wasn't applicable because those faculty were going to be teaching the same courses in another program. That doesn't seem to be satisfying SAC-COC. So all of the faculty in that closed out teach out program will be redeployed to other things. Just be explicit and tell how it's going to be deployed. So if the courses are still going to remain and be used in programs X, Y, and Z, just be explicit and say that. And again, this is for both faculty and staff. So you may have staff instructors that are full-time that need to be included in this. You may have laboratory coordinators, whatever the case may be. Be very explicit and make sure you include both faculty and staff in this redeployment explanation. I would recommend that you contact human resources regarding any university assistance that they may receive as faculty and staff in the event that the teach out results in a reduction in force. There could be a situation where your teach out plan would result in a reduction in force of, let's say, a staff laboratory coordinator. Maybe you have a laboratory coordinator that's hired only for that particular program, and when that program is taught out, that position will no longer exist at the institution. Reach out to HR, figure out what kind of resources those people who will be in a reduction of force, what kind of resources they'll receive from the institution to find new employment, etc. This is going to be fairly rare. For the most part, people will be redeployed, but it is conceivable that somebody could lose their position as a result in reduction of force through a teach out. So just keep that in mind. Also, make sure you review both the faculty handbook and the employee handbook for rules and policies regarding redeployments or reductions in force. Very important. Again, reach out to HR if you have any questions. Institutional effectiveness, my office is not an expert in the faculty handbook nor the employee handbook. So reach out to HR. So let me give you a couple of just overall tips, kind of summarize what we talked about here. Make sure that you review that substantive change policy that's on the Provost website before you begin thinking about program changes, because you might end up being in a sub-change situation, and that sub-change situation might require you to think about a teach-out plan. Start early. Do not do this last minute. There is no way to build a good quality teach-out plan for a program in a matter of just a few hours as you're typing something up into Curriculog. These need to be well thought out, well mapped out processes. Remember that your teach-out will impact not only your current students, but also admitted students. Don't forget about those admitted students. They're going to have to be part of your teach-out plan, and they're going to impact how long your teach-out plan will need to be in place. Very important to develop a curriculum map as you're thinking about your teach-out plan. A lot of programs do this by thinking about semester by semester guide, if you will. Very important to think about what will be offered and how it will be offered during that teach-out period. So again, this is an important reason why you need to start early. I would also recommend that you reach out to your associate dean or to us here in institutional effectiveness before you begin building out your proposals in Curriculog for a teach-out. So if you have any questions, we can catch that early. We can build a good quality teach-out plan from the beginning, and it won't have to be sent back for additional notes. Now, we've gotten a lot of pushback from SAC-COC, like I said, this past semester. And so our intent moving forward will be, if we do not have a complete teach-out plan that addresses all of the points discussed herein and in our substantive change policy or the policies that you see on the SAC-COC website, we will be pushing those back with before they even get considered at the council level. We've got to have these in good shape before the councils see these and move them on to the provost for final approval. So if you need to contact us, you can certainly contact me, Doug Masterson. I'm your SAC-COC accreditation liaison, so I'm the one that SACS is always dealing with this. This is part of my role as Senior Associate Provost for Institutional Effectiveness. And so I see firsthand the frustrations that SACS has had with some of our teach-out plans. And so that's why, that's what prompted this quick video. Feel free to contact me by phone if you need to, 64714, or by email, douglas.masterson@usm.edu. Or you can also reach out to the Director of Institutional Effectiveness, Catherine Lowry. Her number is 66775, or her email, catherine.lowry@usm.edu. Either one of us would be happy to help walk you through the process. We quite frequently ask people to come over and have a visit with us, and we work through a variety of scenarios with them before they develop that final teach-out plan. That's proven to be very, very effective. And I encourage any program that's thinking about going through something that requires a teach-out plan to reach out to us well in advance of putting anything into Curriculog. It'll certainly save time and effort for everybody. A little bit of time up front certainly saves a lot of time on the back end. So I'm a big proponent of that. So I hope you found this useful. If you have any questions, again, please don't hesitate to contact us, and have a great rest of your day.